Okay. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon to you. Welcome to another segment of Chatlink's Blue Umbrella campaign videos. So, if you've been following over the past few months, you'll know that this is like a regular thing wherein we twice a month we do a discussion on various aspects as it relates to violence against boys, young children in general. But the Blue Umbrella Day campaign really focuses on the violence that young boys face, particularly sexual violence, because it's a really under discussed and underreported issue. So we're really trying to bring more light towards the situation. And as part of that, the conversation today will be centered on victim blaming. As you know, violence is very, very common in our society, but unfortunately, we still have a culture that tends to place a blame on the victim rather than the perpetrator. So, we're really just going to be having a conversation today about what some of that means, where it stems from, some of the things that we can do as individuals to promote better habits. And yeah, we're just going to have a chat about that. Today, we have with us Renata Burnett. Renata, for those who might not know you, do you mind just giving a brief introduction of who you are?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Renata, and I'm an artist. I don't want to say I'm a poet because I do other stuff, but I'm an artist. But I also work with the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, and I do outreach work for my district, which is the East Coast. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. Happy that we're discussing topics like this. I know a lot of times we focus on women and girls, so I like angling in this direction. So yes.
Okay, great. So it's really great to have you. And I know, yeah, a lot of times we tend to focus on women and girls because, like, realistically, the violence perpetrated against them is significantly high. But in that focus, we tend to, kind of gloss over the violence that men and boys face. And so
Mhm.
it's always good to just kind of highlight that sometimes. So I know, like, as mentioned earlier, we live in a very patriarchal society that tends to promote a lot of victim blaming. And I know from a women's perspective, the effects of victim blaming can be a lot. But what do you think are some of the things that can significantly impact young boys as it relates to the culture of victim blaming and how that also, really affects them? Because, we tend to treat these things as like separate issues, like a woman's issues or a man issue, but it's
Mhm.
very correlated. How do you think that victim blaming can affect young boys? And men
Um,
in general, because men also experience violence.
agreed. I think I don't want to say that it's worse than women because I am a woman, so I might not be able to fully um or honestly say that, but I think that it's kind of one of those things that never leaves because during those moments where a man or a boy might be sexually assaulted, you might never know. I mean, some women are quiet about it, but some women are more likely to tell their friends or to tell an aunt or a relative or report it in a case. But men, that is something that sticks with them. So I think the effect is very much long term. I think the effect also causes them to be extremely depressed, to be extremely paranoid, to not know how to function or cope in relationships because something so traumatic has happened to them, maybe when they were 3, 4, 12, 11, all these ages, or in their 20s or 30s, somebody overpowered them. And I know we have this rhetoric that men cannot be sexually assaulted, because they're masculine. So I think that the effect of that is very long term because of the fact that even though there are resources that are available to men, it's not a lot. And then it's not a conversation that's being spoken of often and not in the places where men reside. Like I always say, like the barbershop and all these other places that they go. So I think what men do and boys is they carry that with them for an extremely long time. And it affects so much in their lives, especially when it comes to relationships, because they might be anger, there might be a sense of fear of being intimate with somebody, and that person doesn't know where it comes from, because the individual that they're with went through something so traumatic, something that's shunned, by society, and they don't know how to speak about that. So I think that it's so internal, it's very internal for them, and they carry that with them. So I think that's the effect of it being internal and then being something that's there for a very long period of time. So yeah.
Yeah, you really raised some really important points, because like one of the things that was highlighted really is the lack of community a lot of men have, particularly when it comes to issues of abuse. There's not a culture where with women and girls, there's a easier environment, so to speak, when it comes to just kind of sharing your story, having that type of support. But when it comes to you being a man or a young boy, the support isn't usually there. And you see it in things such as, even if the abuser is a woman, it's not seen as abuse. It's seen as something that they should be proud of. Something is like a chip on their shoulder almost.
I've seen that in my friends and male friends having younger brothers, and that brother being either 15 or just about to turn 16 and would have had his virginity taken away by a woman in her 20s or something like that. And that is seen as a trope to carry, because as a man, having had sex with somebody that's 4 or 5 years older than you is something to be glorified. And really and truly, I don't think that men realize that, you're either taken advantage of. And I also don't think that they realize how that affects how they view women to an extent, and how they have relations with women. But yeah, men definitely see it as a trope, which it shouldn't be, but that's the culture that we perpetuate, that you get a trophy or use a big buy, because you can do that or you have done that. When in reality, that's nothing to be proud of, really. But I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And, it also comes back to the whole context of victim blaming, because, you're placing that responsibility on that young child who does not understand the situation, who is, in a very predatory relationship with an older person. But yet they're still the ones that is being held as responsible, So like how do we really begin to challenge these narratives that young boys can't be raped or men can't be vulnerable? What are some things that we realistically as individuals, community members, what are some things that we can do?
I think because of the fact that these things start so early, since men or boys were the age of 3 or 2, I think it's imperative that parents, because that's kind of like in the home, that's your first sense of institution, and that's your first sense of learning. I think it's important for parents to teach both men and women, equally across the board. You don't glorify even boys. I know a lot of us like to do this to young boys, 6'5", you can get a lot of girls because, you sound cute, and we like to do that. And it's, in a way, it's very kind of sickening, but that's a culture for us. We like to pair and match. And I think the same conversations we have with girls, because at different age, the conversation, obviously the words and the way it's put over is going to be different, but it's the same. It's all about, if somebody touches you inappropriately, you tell me as your parent. If somebody asks you to do something that you feel uncomfortable, you come to me. And I think creating that space whereby your parent is your protector. And at the same time, you also have parents who sexually assault their children, and close relatives. And there's a fear because that perpetrator lets a child know that nobody's going to believe you. So I think that as a parent, the need, or it's very imperative that you let your child know that if you come to me, I will not only listen to you, but I will believe you. And we will get to the bottom of the situation. It's not something to be brushed off. It's not something that we should just say, oh, it's your imagination. those are things that needs to be taken very seriously. So I feel like the teaching and the onus is on the parent to make their children feel comfortable, because as much as you want to protect your child or children, you're not going to be there at every step in their lives. You know what I mean? And or you're not going to be present at every moment. So it's very important for you to maybe, I don't want to say a code, but for you to have a relationship where, you know, you can come and talk to mommy or you can come and talk to daddy. And I think it's important for us to instill this knowledge in children about consent and persons asking your permission. You know, I was in the car the other day and a mother was a taxi, and the mother was stopping the car, and he looked like a 2 or 3 year old, and he was climbing into the car, and I stretched my hands out to help him get up. And he was like, you know, because I'm a stranger, so he just started making noise. And I apologized because I said, even though he's 2, I said, sorry, I really should have asked your permission before I reached out my hand. And that is important to note that, you know, I know a lot of people like to help children or lift them up, but it's important to teach children. Let somebody ask their permission. And that is important. That is very important. So that conversation needs to be had at a very early age. And, you know, I know a lot of us do it to girls with, you know, what you wear or stuff like that. But I think it needs to go across the board. You also need to speak to boys in that manner and not just glorify boys at 5 being cute and having 6 different girlfriends. You know, that's not the narrative that you should be teaching your children. Even though it's a cultural thing, I definitely believe that the teaching starts very early. Talking about consent, talking about permission, talking about feeling uncomfortable. If somebody's making you uncomfortable, you let me know, regardless of who that person is. You know, you don't just say if it's a friend or a stranger, because if we know or if we read and do our research, a lot of these things happen with close relatives. It's either a cousin or an uncle. So I definitely believe that it starts early, very early, because predators prey on children 2, 3, 4 years old. So you have to start that teaching very early, in my opinion.
No, you're very, very right. The conversations need to start very early. And I think like in Guyana, we have a culture of one, not having these open conversations with children because, you know, they're kind of viewed as being lesser beings in a sense. They don't have all the rights us adults have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
want to understand. You want to understand.
Exactly. Yeah, so like when children come to adults now and they say, well, hey, you know, maybe uncle or a cousin or somebody did something to me. You know, a child comes from that place and they don't come with any ill intent or ill will or anything like that. They're simply just stating what has happened to them or what made them feel uncomfortable. But yet, because like a lot of families don't have these conversations, they don't feel comfortable with it. And also that because they just grew up in an environment wherein victim blaming is so normal, they might say to the child, oh, you might have misinterpreted it, or that's not what happened, or are you sure? And of course, what this teaches a child is that, you know, the behavior is acceptable or that they will not be believed in the future. And I think like, this is very, very dangerous. And it even
go ahead.
Yeah, it is very dangerous. Sorry, were you about to say something?
No, I was gonna say like every time I hear those rhetoric from parents, it always gives me this Matilda situation where is I'm big, you're small, I'm right, you're wrong. And children because children mimic what they see. So if they know that when they come to you, they're going to be met with frustration, you know, as much as parents try to shrug things off, and you're a parent yourself. So like if a child breaks something that's important, like a glass or a vase or whatever the case might be, you know, they might be met like they're scared. They'd even lie and say it wasn't me, because of the fact that they know what they'd be met with. You know, you might get some lash, you might get some thump. And I think that we have this culture. I don't want to get into the whole corporal punishment thing. You know, some people, it work for them according to them and whatever the case might be. But I'm just trying to say that the whole aspect of creating a relationship where your child doesn't fear you. So if a grown adult touches me inappropriately, I don't think as a 3, 4, 5-year-old that my mother is going to hit me because she'll believe that I'm lying. So those same things whereby, a child breaks a vase, you would be mad at them. But to be infuriated to the point where they fear you, that's different, because that type of response gives way to your child just not feeling comfortable to tell you anything. And as a parent, I don't say as a parent because I'm not a parent, but I'm just saying it would be very disheartening to know that your child was abused by a cousin or a family member that you trusted. And 10, 15 years down the line is when they finally decided to tell you because they feared that you would not believe them, or you'd be infuriated to the point where, you treat them badly. So I think like that is very important to note also. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because like a lot of children experience violence, but as you said, their home environment might not be one that's safe or one that they feel comfortable to share certain things. And so they continue with that. They continue being abused. And it isn't until they're much older that a lot of persons are really able to come to terms with that and share that. And even then, a lot of them still face a lot of the stigma and the backlash that they would have feared.
Because you still have to see these people, you still have to see these people at Christmas time or somebody's birthday. You still have to be in the same room with this person. And I really would have liked for us to have more men, but I know that this conversation isn't like a free flowing in the male community. But I think that has to do so much damage to you. And then when you live in a society that kind of, they just force you into this toxic masculinity, as a man, you shouldn't be crying as a man. You shouldn't be feelsy as a man. You shouldn't let anybody see you struggle or hurt. And there's so much being placed on boys from that age. Don't hold your bag like that. Don't dance like that. Like children who freely want to express themselves, adults see it and go, oh, this too much, males I'm talking about, on the girly side of thing, or don't talk like this. So there's a lot of policing of boys, and this idea that in order for you to be a man, these are the things you need to either hide or get rid of or not do. So when that happens to somebody, let's say somebody now coming into puberty or whatever, and all of that is being reinstated by either their father or their uncle or their mother's friends or whomever the case might be, or whomever it might be, sorry, it's just this thought of, well, I should be tough, I shouldn't be complaining. I shouldn't be crying. I shouldn't be hurt by this. I just need to get over it. And it's that thought process where you have men that are deeply depressed. And I know a lot of men don't believe in therapy, also known as paying some strangers to talk to you about your own problems. So that's something that they carry, so and then as you grow up, where do you put that down? Exactly. Where are you leaving all of that baggage of, if I didn't go into the room at that time, if I locked my door, all the ifs, trying to blame yourself in a sense, because that's technically what you're doing. Like, where does one put that down when they reach their 20s, when they're getting into relationships, exploring sexuality, trying to figure out who they are? What do they do with that? You have to ask yourself, like, what do men do with that? And in a lot of ways, you see it come out in abuse, not only physically and verbally to other people, but also like in alcohol, also like in what they choose to occupy their time with, or what they choose to de-stress. And I feel like it's so much to unpack. It's so much to unpack. And then when you're in a relationship with somebody, speaking from a woman's standpoint, that has been sexually assaulted as a child or as a teenager, as a grown man, going to a party and somebody coming into the washroom with you, behind you, and overpowering you. Like, how do you have that conversation? How do you try to offer comfort to somebody not being a man yourself? How do you process that? How do you deal with that? So it's a lot to take in. So when we brush these things off as men can't be raped or men can't be assaulted, or stuff like that, it's kind of dangerous because men really sit on these things and they think about it and they choose to just not say anything about it because again, they don't want to be shamed or blamed for something that they weren't responsible for. So when you think about it, it's very heavy, to be honest. It is very heavy, So, spiraled off there. Sorry.
No, you made some very important points. It is a very, very heavy topic, and but these conversations are really worth having. This type of honest, open communication is definitely what's needed. And like when it comes to a lot of the things that men and boys tend to internalize, I know a lot of reasons that violence against men and boys are significantly underreported. And one of the reasons for this is that a lot of the abusers tend to be males. And so there's this added dynamic there of, will I be seen as gay? Are people going to think that I'm a homosexual if it is that I come forward with this allegation? So there's also that sexuality aspect to it. Like, how do we begin to challenge these narratives that an abuser has no impact on your sexuality whatsoever?
I think that like the persons that are placed in authority and to bring light to the police, because obviously that's where you would go to report what is essentially a crime. So just the training, because like I said, as a country, as a culture, we have this deep rooted idea that, and for men, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because for men, either way, either male or either if you were assaulted by a male or a female, either way it's bad for you, because if you report that a female sexually assaulted you, you get clung out for that, because how could a woman rape you? You know what I mean? That's something that people generally don't believe is possible, and especially men in authority, because that is something that would be laughed at or shamed for. But that happens. There are men, just like other women, who don't want to be approached, who don't want to be touched without their consent, who don't want to have sex with you just because you're a nice looking female. You know what I mean? So those things happen, but because of how society is, if you're a man, either way, you're going to be made to feel bad. If a woman assaults you, then you should have taken advantage, or you should be glad that this girl decided for whatever. And if it's a man, then your sexuality comes into question. Like, are you on the cover and your boyfriend beat you up and now you come in for a set? You know what I mean? So the question therefore becomes that the system has to be changed. You know what I mean? In the sense of the persons that are working in the sexual assault department, they have to be trained to the extent where they're not going to be biased against persons, where there's an understanding that this does happen to men, this does happen to women, and my job is to help them seek whatever justice is that they're looking for. My job is to help get the perpetrator of this. My job is to raise as much awareness as I can. So when you have persons in those positions, which I like to think is kind of, I don't want to say the highest, but you have persons in those positions of authority, and then you go to them as a man, despite whatever society might think of you, it takes so much courage to swallow whatever pride that you have to go speak to grown men to say, listen, this happened to me the other night and I'd like the person to be arrested. I'd like the matter to be investigated. It takes a lot of pride for you to do that. And like you said, these things are very much underreported, and obviously we see why. So the whole notion that you have persons who deal with this directly, what is the training like? Are you training persons who are have like an implicit bias? Are you speaking to persons that they're grounded in their belief that that is not true? So these are the things that you have to consider when you're putting certain people in this department. I mean, we can talk about police and how it is that they operate in general, But like specifically for that matter, which is very sensitive, you need to have people that are trained to deal with those matters. And you need to have persons that are very much firm, but also people that want to help. So there's a genuineness there and there's a kindness there to make that person feel like a human being, not to discriminate against them, not to shame them, not to make them feel bad, because as we know, these things can lead to other things. It could lead to possible suicide. It could lead to things, that are more or even more detrimental than what that person was already going through. So I think it's important to know that if we want to tackle this whereby men and boys feel comfortable to report these things, then are systems where they make these reports at the persons that are working in those departments. They need to be individuals with a certain criteria. They need to be individuals that are willing and want to help. I feel like as much as we want to talk about passion and stuff like that, you have to find people that want to help, because I feel like they go the extra mile. They investigate, they listen. They're not going to say, oh, come back tomorrow, and stuff like that, and kind of brush you off. So the system really is broken in a sense. So training extensively needs to be done, and not every 3-5 years. If quarterly is good. I know resources are lacking, but those things need to be on the ball. There's always different strategies. There's always different researches coming out and stuff like that. So I think it's important that persons understand and actually do something in that regard, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense, because like when you look at the police system, the judicial system in general, while we tend to focus a lot on other crimes, sexual violence is severely underfunded. Like you have a sexual offenses unit, and like you'd have one person staffing it. Like that's already sends a message as to how important they might see the matter.
True.
So resources are already stretched thinly.
Yes.
And you have one person who has to deal with hundreds of abuse cases regularly. And so it really, yeah, exactly. So it really has to come from, it's not only something that we have to work on at the community level, but it's also something that needs urgent attention from national leaders to ensure that these things are funded properly, ensure that, as you said, persons are trained for the job that they do. And It's not just like, oh, we get this person here, we know what to do with them, we should put them to work on domestic violence or sexual offenses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times these cases are seen as punishment for a lot of these officers and stuff like that. They might be pulled from one area and put into that as a punishment.
Is interesting. That is interesting. I really didn't think of that. That is actually interesting, because then it begs the question of, if that person is being placed there as a form of punishment, then what type of effort is that person going to put into doing the work? So it just makes people feel like even the system that is in place to either protect them, it's a joke. So again, it makes men and boys feel like I have to do this by myself. And I think that thought, which is very prominent in so many men, it really just eats away at you, because here you are, having been through this, not sure how to gain support, not sure how to say this, with your entire chest, that this happened to me, not sure how comfortable you are, not sure if you can trust those people. And I think like that doesn't do much for our society. But it's interesting that people do that for punishment. I had to ask my friend that works in that department, because yeah, that's sad, man. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that that's a possible thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. But yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation and the way that it went, and like just highlighting a lot of the vulnerabilities that young boys and men face. I mean, thinking not only about like the abuse from a gender perspective, but also how it impacts their mental health, their ideas of sexuality. I think these are all very important conversations to have. But that brings me to an end to my questions. But do you want to leave any final thoughts? Anything that you believe is important for persons to know that I might not have asked you?
Let me just apologize for being long-winded if I am about to. I think that
No.
I think that women, I'm not saying the onus is on us, but I'm saying, you live in a society, it's boys, girls, it's men, women. I think it's important for, I'm not saying that women have to be the heroes or take up the mantle and fix whatever, because what is interesting is when women have, and this is no shade, when women have issues that they're dealing with, whether sexual reproductive or whatever the case might be, we really do rally for ourselves and for each other. We really do take up that mantle and protest. We really go hard because we're a community. And I don't believe that men are technically the same in that regard because of, again, fear and just how you are seen in society as a man. So you don't have a lot of men rallying for their rights, or in terms of, like, if they're victimization, you don't have a lot of that, or we don't see a lot of that, I should say. But I definitely think that women are also not to be blamed, but a lot of women have been responsible for perpetuating this narrative that if you're a man, be a man kind of situation. You understand? So it's almost like, if I tell you that, listen, this happened to me when I was a child, a lot of women use that against men to make them feel bad. You understand and you're comforting and whatever, but when you guys aren't on terms, that is something that's being used against you as a weapon. And I think that is so, so dangerous, because again, it's almost like you're in a hole, and the more things happen, the further you dig yourself down. And I'm talking about like in a mental capacity, mental health wise. So I feel like for us women, I know a lot of us, sometimes we go off the rim, sometimes we say things that we don't mean. But if a man or a boy comes to you and say these things to you, like, this happened to me, I'm talking, let me just specify to relationships. If somebody says that to you, I think the best response would just be to thank that person for trusting you enough to say that, and for also being brave enough to express themselves, and then recommend therapy, or just recommend that it be a possibility, that therapy is out there for you. It's not to belittle them, it's not to make them feel like less of a man, it's not to make them feel bad, because their thoughts already made them feel bad, the experience already made them feel bad, so they don't need to be beaten up upon. So I feel like that is also very important. But also, like, for men that are watching this, you are definitely not alone. And because of the fact that very few of you speak out, I would understand why you would feel that way. But there's so many people, so many men that have been sexually assaulted from when they were a kid, in their teens, and also grown men. There is no particular age, And last thing to note is that if you have friends, male friends, that speak in that, like, if you know that you have male friends that are preying on young boys and things like that, the onus is on you to not only let that individual know that that is wrong, but the onus is on you to help that child or help that teenager, or to report that grown man for taking advantage of somebody, that didn't give their consent. So I think, like, those are things to note. You don't buddy up with all these people that are doing things like that and openly saying that they're doing things like that, because that is a long lasting and damaging type of trauma to live with. So I feel like, if you hear these things in small corners or whatever, you need to be the person to go, that is definitely not right, or just kind of intervene in a sense. And I know that's a lot to ask, but I feel like that responsibility is on you. But also, yeah, I feel parents need to be very much aware and involved in their children's life. And like we spoke about, all those things that we touched on, I hope that parents practice it. But just to let men know that it is okay, that you're not alone, and there's definitely help out there for you. And I would have hoped that it would be more, and speaking out about it would be easier, but that's just the reality of the situation. But you're definitely not struggling by yourself. and there are other people that share either the same experience and the same feelings. And I really hope that you seek help and therapy, because it does a lot. We can't undo the situation, obviously, but it does a lot to help you just unpack whatever it is that you're carrying, because you obviously didn't deserve that, and it definitely wasn't your fault. I feel like it's very important to let boys and men know that that wasn't your fault. That was an adult that knew better but didn't. So that wasn't your fault, because a lot of victims believe that it's their fault. As a man, I should have protected myself and stuff like that. So yeah.
I co-sign every single thing you just said. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Again,
And thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Was that?
I said thank you again for these conversations. I like the fact that these conversations are being had. I love the fact that these conversations are being had. And I try to talk. I'm me. So I always try to let my friends know, whatever the case might be. And I feel a lot of people should be like that. You have these conversations in your group, man. We could talk about alcohol a whole day, but you just want to test people's minds on, where you at or how you feel about certain things. So yeah. So I'm happy to would have been a part of this.
It was lovely to have you, Renata.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your thoughts and perspectives. Take care. Bye.